That night, I was ready to bury the past. But my family had other plans. The crystal chandeliers of Gatsby Mansion hung above me like judge and jury, their light refracting into 1,000 sharp fragments that seemed to pierce straight through my carefully constructed armor. Jazz music curled through the air, sultry and mocking, as if the universe itself had orchestrated a soundtrack for my humiliation. I stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, my champagne-colored dress suddenly feeling too tight, too plain, too much like a costume I had borrowed from someone else's life. Around me, guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos floated past, their laughter bright and carefree. None of them knew what it felt like to walk into a room and immediately search for the nearest exit. None of them understood the weight of being the family disappointment, the one whose name was whispered with pity at holiday dinners and charity galas. I had promised myself this would be different. Olivia's wedding would be the night I finally proved I belonged, that I wasn't the failure they all believed me to be. I had spent weeks choosing this dress, rehearsing small talk, preparing myself for the barrage of questions about my life that would inevitably come. Where are you working now, Madison? Are you seeing anyone special? When are you going to settle down? But nothing could have prepared me for what waited at my assigned seat. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excess, exactly the kind of spectacle my stepmother Victoria lived for. White roses cascaded from towering centerpieces, their petals so perfect they looked artificial. Gold-rimmed china sat at each place setting, reflecting the warm glow of candlelight. A string quartet played in the corner, their melody weaving between the conversations of Silicon Valley executives and old-money socialites who had known my family for generations. I made my way through the crowd, offering tight smiles to people I half-recognized from childhood parties and family functions I had tried to forget. My heels clicked against the marble floor with each step, a metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet name. The tables were arranged in concentric circles around a central dance floor, each one marked with elegant calligraphy on cream cardstock. I found mine near the back, far from the head table where Olivia would sit with her new husband Ethan, far from the family table where my father Richard and Victoria would hold court. My placement was deliberate, a geography of rejection that everyone in the room would understand. Then I saw it. The place card sat propped against a crystal water glass, its message printed in bold black letters that seemed to scream across the white cardstock. Madison Hayes, single failure. My breath caught in my throat. The world tilted sideways, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. The music became distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. Around me, guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that my entire being had just been reduced to 2 words designed to maximize my shame. I stood frozen, staring at that card as if it might change if I looked at it long enough. But the words remained, stark and cruel, a public declaration of everything I had spent years trying to outrun. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I turned to find Victoria approaching, a champagne flute in one hand, her crimson lipstick stretched into what might have been a smile on anyone else but looked predatory on her. "Oh, at least we're not lying, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. 31 years old, no husband, no house, no future. What else was there to write? Her eyes glittered with satisfaction as she took in my expression. I knew that look. I had seen it countless times over the years, whenever she managed to land a particularly cutting remark, whenever she reminded me in subtle and not-so-subtle ways that I would never measure up to Olivia, her biological daughter, the golden child who could do no wrong. I wanted to respond. I wanted to throw my champagne in her face, to scream, to cause the kind of scene that would finally force my family to acknowledge how they treated me. But the words stuck in my throat, trapped behind years of conditioning that told me to be quiet, to be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance they threw my way, to never make waves. Instead, I clenched my hands under the white linen tablecloth, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave crescents. The pain was grounding, real, something to focus on besides the burning humiliation spreading through my chest. Victoria leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming in its sweetness. "Look at you, speechless as always. You're lucky to even have a seat here, darling. You should be thanking Olivia for maintaining the family image despite how you embarrass us. Not like you've ever contributed anything." The words landed like physical blows, each one finding its mark with practiced precision. Around us, conversations had quieted. People were watching now, their gazes sliding between Victoria and me, hungry for drama in the way that wealthy people always are when it's not their own lives being dissected. I looked down at the table, at the beautiful place setting that should have represented celebration but instead felt like a trap. Every detail of this wedding had been designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, and this place card was just the most obvious symbol of a truth I had been running from for years. Then Olivia appeared, radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, her arm linked through Ethan's. She looked like every bride should look on their wedding day, glowing with happiness and secure in the knowledge that this was her moment, her triumph. When her eyes landed on me, something dark flickered across her features, quickly masked by a practiced smile. "I hope you're enjoying your seat, Madison," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We put so much thought into the seating arrangements, wanted everyone to feel appropriately placed. Ethan looked uncomfortable, his gaze darting between his new wife and me, but he said nothing. Of course he said nothing. Nobody ever said anything when it came to how my family treated me. Olivia's smile sharpened. You've always been an embarrassment, really. Tonight is no different, is it? The words hung in the air between us, brutal in their simplicity. Around us, guests had stopped pretending not to listen. This was better than entertainment. This was real family drama unfolding at one of the season's most anticipated weddings. I felt something crack inside me, some final barrier between the person I had been trying to be and the rage I had been swallowing for 31 years. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling, at the painted cherubs and gilded molding, and forced the tears that threatened to spill back where they came from. I would not cry. Not here, not now, not for them. But something else was replacing the sadness, something hot and fierce that I had spent my entire life suppressing. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was hatred, pure and consuming, directed at every person in this room who had ever made me feel less than, who had ever dismissed my pain as sensitivity, who had ever told me to be grateful for crumbs when I deserved the whole damn meal. The ballroom seemed to grow smaller, the walls closing in as the full weight of my situation pressed down on me. This wasn't going to change. They would never see me as anything other than the family failure, the cautionary tale, the daughter who couldn't get her life together. And I was done waiting for them to recognize my worth. Just as Victoria opened her mouth to deliver what I knew would be another cutting remark, the sound of an engine cut through the jazz music, deep and powerful and impossible to ignore. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. Through the tall windows, I could see the sleek black silhouette of a Rolls-Royce Phantom pulling up to the front steps, its chrome grille catching the light from the entrance lanterns. The car was pristine, expensive in a way that transcended mere money and entered the realm of power. The music faltered as the driver's side door opened, and then the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. He stepped out like something from a dream I didn't know I had been having. The charcoal suit fit him perfectly, tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean frame that moved with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove anything to anyone. Dark hair, sharp jawline, and eyes that swept across the crowd with an intensity that made people instinctively step back. Alexander Thorne. Even people who didn't know his name knew his face. Tech mogul, venture capitalist, the man who had built an empire before he turned 35 and showed no signs of slowing down. His companies were household names, his investments legendary, his influence felt in boardrooms from San Francisco to Shanghai, and he was walking straight toward me. The crowd parted like water, guests stumbling over themselves to get out of his way. Whispers erupted across the ballroom, a wave of speculation and shock that grew louder with each step he took. I stood frozen at my seat, my hand still gripping the edge of the tablecloth, as this man I had never met closed the distance between us with purposeful strides. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker, more complex. Then he smiled, a small curve of his lips that somehow managed to be both gentle and absolutely terrifying. "My wife," he said, his voice low and rich, pitched to carry across the now silent ballroom. His arms slid around my waist, pulling me against his side with an intimacy that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Who called her a failure? The question hung in the air like a blade. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The jazz band had stopped playing entirely, their instruments lowered as they craned their necks to see what was happening. Victoria's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor in a spray of glass and golden liquid. The color drained from her face, her carefully applied makeup suddenly garish against her pallor. She tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound that might have been the start of my name. "Oh, Alex," she finally managed, her voice climbing an octave higher than normal. "You're joking, right? We were just teasing Madison. She's always been so sensitive. You know how family is." Alex's arm tightened around my waist, a gesture of protection and possession that made my head spin. I didn't know this man. I had no idea why he was here, why he was claiming me as his wife, why he was looking at my stepmother like she was something he might scrape off his shoe. But in that moment, I decided to trust it, to lean into whatever this was, because anything was better than standing alone against their cruelty one more time. "There's a significant difference between teasing and humiliation," Alex said, his tone glacier cold, "and I don't tolerate anyone humiliating my wife." He reached past me and picked up the place card, holding it up for everyone to see. The bold black letters seemed even more damning in his hands, evidence of cruelty that could no longer be dismissed as family banter. "Single failure." He read aloud, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Is this how the Hayes family treats their own? By labeling them with their perceived inadequacies at a public event?" My father appeared at Victoria's side, his face red, his tuxedo suddenly looking too tight around his thick neck. Richard Hayes had built a construction empire from nothing. A self-made man who liked to remind everyone of his humble origins while enjoying every privilege his wealth afforded. He had never understood me, never known how to talk to the daughter who preferred books to building sites, who asked too many questions and challenged too many assumptions. "That's enough," Richard said, his voice booming with practiced authority. "This is my daughter's wedding. I won't have you disrupting it." Alex turned to face him, and I felt the shift in energy immediately. This wasn't a confrontation between equals. This was a predator acknowledging prey, a reminder of where real power resided. "Your daughter's wedding," Alex repeated slowly, as if tasting each word. "And yet, you allowed this circus to take place under your roof?" He gestured at the place card again, then at Victoria, then at the crowd of guests who were recording everything on their phones. "You allowed them to label Madison as if she were less than everyone here. Tell me, Richard, what kind of father laughs while his own daughter is publicly shamed?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish, no sound emerging. I had never seen him speechless before. He was always the one with the last word, the final say, the voice that drowned out all others. But faced with Alex's quiet fury, he seemed to shrink, to become smaller than the sum of his expensive suit and imported shoes. Olivia pushed through the crowd, her veil trailing behind her like a white flag that no one was waving. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with tears that I suspected were more from anger than sadness. "Don't make this about Madison," she hissed, her carefully cultivated bride persona cracking to reveal the sister I knew too well. "This is my wedding, not her redemption arc. She's been an embarrassment her entire life. Tonight is no different." Before I could process the familiar sting of her words, Alex stepped forward, placing himself between Olivia and me like a human shield. "Olivia," he said, and there was something dangerous in how softly he spoke her name. "You should be very careful about what you say next, because the only embarrassment here isn't Madison. It's the cruelty of a family that has spent years trying to break someone who refused to stay broken." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Phones were definitely recording now, capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become the scandal of the season. I could already see the headlines. Tech billionaire crashes wedding to defend mystery wife. Hayes family drama unfolds at daughter's wedding. Who is Madison Hayes Thorne? Victoria had recovered some of her composure, though her hands shook as she reached for another champagne flute from a passing waiter. She downed half of it in one gulp before turning her razor-sharp attention back to Alex. "Madison should have had all of this years ago," she said, her voice taking on that particular quality of someone who believes they're being reasonable while saying something utterly unreasonable. "But she was too stubborn, too proud to accept the help we offered. She chose to fail, chose to be alone. And now? Now she drags some man with a fancy car here to play hero. You don't know what she's really like, Alex. She's nothing." The word nothing echoed through the ballroom, and I felt its weight settle over me like a familiar coat, one I had worn for so long it had shaped itself to my body. Nothing. I was nothing. I had always been nothing in their eyes, but then something inside me snapped. Enough. My voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear and completely foreign to my own ears. Every head swiveled toward me, and I realized with a jolt that I had never, not once in 31 years, raised my voice to Victoria. I had never interrupted her, never contradicted her directly, never claimed space that she deemed hers, until now. I stepped out from behind Alex, standing on my own feet, feeling the ground solid beneath my heels. My hands had stopped shaking. My heart had stopped racing. Instead, there was a calm that came from finally reaching the breaking point and discovering that falling felt like flying. "You've spent years reminding me of everything I'm not," I said, my words measured and deliberate. "Not pretty enough, not successful enough, not worthy enough. But tonight, you've shown everyone here exactly who you really are. People who take pride in tearing others down because it's the only way you know how to feel powerful." Victoria's eyes widened, genuine shock replacing her usual smugness. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every time you made me feel like I was lucky just to exist in your presence, I told myself you didn't mean it, that it was just your way. That family was supposed to be hard. I looked around the ballroom, at the sea of faces watching this unfold. But family isn't supposed to destroy you, and I'm done letting you try. Alex's hand found mine, his fingers interlacing with my own. The gesture was simple, but it steadied me, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this moment, even if I had been alone for so many years leading up to it. "Madison doesn't need to prove herself to anyone here," Alex said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "But since you're all so obsessed with appearances, with status, with the external markers of success, perhaps you should know exactly who you've been mocking." The crowd leaned in collectively, hungry for the revelation they sensed coming. Alex looked directly at Victoria, and the smile that crossed his face was not kind. "She's my wife, the woman who stood beside me when I had nothing but ideas and debt. The woman whose insights shaped half the strategies that built my first company. The the woman who saw potential where everyone else saw risk. He paused, letting his words sink in. You see me, my car, my name, my influence. But what you don't understand is that none of it exists without her. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent in my ears. Around us, guests stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to calculation to something that might have been respect. Olivia's face had gone from flush to pale, her perfect bridal makeup unable to hide the way her features twisted with something ugly and jealous. Her hands clenched in the silk of her dress, crumpling the expensive fabric. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Madison, building an empire? She can't even maintain a bank account. Don't tell fairy tales to these people, Alex. They deserve the truth. The truth, Alex repeated, and there was steel in his voice now. You want the truth? Here it is. You're standing in a fairy tale, Olivia, but you're not the princess. You're the villain everyone will remember long after they forget why they came here tonight. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped. Another person started clapping, then caught themselves. The dynamics of the room were shifting, power redistributing itself in real time as people recalculated their allegiances and their social standing. Victoria tried one more time, desperation creeping into her voice. This is absurd. Madison building empires? She barely manages her own life. You're clearly being manipulated, Alex. She's playing you. Manipulated, I said softly, and the word tasted bitter. That's rich coming from someone who spent 15 years manipulating my father into believing I was the problem. Who convinced him that loving me meant enabling my supposed failures. Who made sure that every milestone in my life was overshadowed by Olivia's accomplishments. I turned to my father, who looked older suddenly, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders hunched. Dad, when was the last time you asked me about my life? Not to judge it, not to compare it to Olivia's, but because you genuinely wanted to know? Richard's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or might have been the champagne he had been steadily consuming. Madison, You can't remember, I finished for him. Because you never did. Victoria made sure of that. The accusation hung between us, years of resentment and pain, crystallizing into words that could never be taken back, and I didn't want to take them back. I was tired of swallowing my truth to make other people comfortable. Alex reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. Every eye in the room tracked its movement as he placed it deliberately on the table in front of Richard. Since you're all so concerned with appearances, with success, with proving worth through material means, Alex said, his tone conversational despite the tension crackling through the air. Let me help you understand what Madison's contributions actually mean. Richard's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the seal. He pulled out several sheets of paper, expensive letterhead, that even from a distance I could see bore the logo of Reed Enterprises, Alex's flagship company. What is this? Richard asked, though his voice suggested he already knew it was bad news. As of yesterday, Reed Enterprises no longer considers Clark and Hayes Construction a viable partner, Alex said calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than destroying my family's primary source of income. The contracts you've been negotiating, the ones that represent approximately 60% of your projected revenue for the next 3 years, terminated. The color drained from Richard's face so quickly I thought he might collapse. Around us, guests who understood business implications began murmuring, the sound building like a wave. Clark and Hayes Construction was my father's legacy, the company he had built from the ground up, and Reed Enterprises was one of their biggest clients. Losing that partnership wasn't just embarrassing. It was potentially catastrophic. You can't do this, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. We have contracts, agreements. Had, Alex corrected. Past tense, and yes, I can do this. I did do this. Because I don't do business with people who treat their own family like garbage. He leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding despite his relaxed posture. You want to know what Madison built? She built the ethical framework that guides every partnership decision I make. And according to that framework, you failed the test. Olivia snatched the papers from Richard's hands, her eyes scanning the text with increasing horror. No, she said, her voice rising. No, no, no. You're ruining everything. My wedding, my family, our future. She thrust the documents at Ethan, who stood beside her looking increasingly uncomfortable. Do something. Ethan took the papers but didn't look at them. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time all evening. This is what you did to her? He asked quietly, addressing Olivia, but keeping his gaze on me. The place card, the seating, the comments. This is how you treat your sister? She's not my sister, Olivia snapped, the words erupting like they had been waiting years to escape. She's the daughter of a woman my father made the mistake of marrying before he met my mother. She's a reminder of his past mistakes, and she's always been in my way. The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. After years of pretending we were a real family, of maintaining the fiction that the Hayes clan was united and loving, the truth was finally being spoken aloud. Then, I suppose, Ethan said slowly, his words careful and measured, that I've made a mistake too. Olivia's head whipped around to stare at her new husband. What are you talking about? This, Ethan said, gesturing at the chaos around them, at the ruined wedding reception, at the family drama playing out in front of hundreds of witnesses. You did this, Olivia. You and your mother. I thought I was marrying someone kind, someone who valued family. He shook his head. But I can't stand beside someone who treats people this way. I won't. The words landed like bombs, each one detonating with perfect precision. Olivia's face contorted, cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like fear. Her perfect wedding, her perfect life, was crumbling around her, and for once she had no way to redirect the blame onto me. You're choosing her over me? Olivia's voice had gone shrill, desperate. On our wedding day? Because of some dramatic entrance and business threats? I'm choosing not to be complicit, Ethan said quietly. There's a difference. He set the papers down on the nearest table and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the shocked silence. Guests parted to let him through, their phones still recording, still capturing every moment of what would be dissected on social media and in gossip columns for weeks to come. Olivia stood frozen in her wedding dress, the picture-perfect bride turned into a portrait of devastation. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, to reach out and offer comfort the way sisters should. But the larger part, the part that had been beaten down and humiliated for years, felt only a cold satisfaction. Victoria was the first to recover, her survival instincts kicking in as she tried to salvage something from the wreckage. This is all a misunderstanding, she announced to the crowd, her voice taking on that bright, brittle quality of someone in denial. Family drama, you know how it is. Let's not let it ruin this beautiful celebration. But the guests were already moving, gathering their belongings, whispering to each other as they calculated how to distance themselves from the Hayes family scandal. In the world of Silicon Valley elite and old-money socialites, perception was everything, and the Hayes family's carefully constructed image had just shattered into a million unrepairable pieces. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 31 years lifting off my shoulders. The fear that had governed so many of my decisions, the need for their approval that had shaped so many of my choices, was gone. In its place was something lighter, cleaner, like emerging from underwater and finally being able to breathe. Does this feel good? Alex asked quietly, his lips close to my ear so only I could hear. It feels necessary, I answered, and that was the truth. This wasn't about revenge, though the satisfaction was undeniable. It was about drawing a line, about saying enough, about refusing to be the punching bag for people who should have loved me. I turned to face the remaining crowd, the guests who hadn't yet fled, the ones who were still recording, still watching, still waiting to see how this would end. This was never about proving I was good enough for them, I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom with a clarity I had never possessed before. It was about proving I was strong enough without them. The applause started slowly, tentatively, from a woman in a blue dress near the back. Then another person joined in, and another, until the sound filled the ballroom, washing over me like absolution. They weren't clapping for my success or my marriage, or even for the dramatic confrontation they had just witnessed. They were clapping for survival, for the moment when someone finally stops accepting less than they deserve. Victoria sank into the nearest chair, her composure finally cracking completely. Richard stood beside her, the contract papers still clutched in his hand, looking like a man who had just realized how much he had lost and how little of it had to do with business deals. Olivia gathered her dress and ran from the ballroom, her veil streaming behind her like a white flag of surrender. The guests parted to let her pass, their expressions ranging from pity to judgment to relief that it wasn't their family being torn apart for public consumption. I looked down at the place card that had started all of this. Madison Hayes, single failure still printed in bold black letters. With deliberate care, I picked it up and tore it in half, then in quarters, then into pieces so small they could never be reassembled. The fragments drifted to the floor like snow, and with them fell the last remnants of the girl who had spent her life trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. Alex's hand found the small of my back, grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this new world I was stepping into. His touch was gentle but steady, offering support without claiming ownership. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear it over the murmurs of shock and confusion that still rippled through the grand ballroom. I looked around the Gatsby mansion one last time, at the crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic light across faces, frozen in disbelief, at the white roses that had been arranged with such meticulous care, at the gilt-edged luxury that had seemed so intimidating when I arrived just hours ago. It all looked smaller now, less impressive, like a stage set that had been revealed for the illusion it was. The mansion hadn't changed, but I had, and that shift in perspective had transformed everything. The ice sculpture that had been the centerpiece of the reception was already beginning to melt in earnest, water pooling on the white marble floor. It seemed fitting somehow, a metaphor I couldn't ignore even if I tried. All of this grandeur, all of this carefully constructed perfection, was temporary. It would melt and evaporate and be forgotten, while I would endure, rebuild, become something stronger. More than ready, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. We walked out together, past the remaining guests who parted like the Red Sea, their expressions ranging from scandalized horror to barely concealed glee at the drama unfolding before them. I caught snippets of whispered conversations. Did you see what she did? I always knew she had it in her. The family must be mortified, but the words slid off me like rain on glass. Their opinions, their judgments, their gossip meant nothing anymore. They were spectators in a play they didn't understand, and I was no longer performing for their entertainment. We passed the staff who were already beginning to clean up the debris of a reception that would never be completed, their faces carefully neutral as they collected half-empty champagne flutes and abandoned plates of untouched canapés. I wondered what they thought of the evening's events, whether they saw it as tragedy or triumph, whether any of them had ever wanted to walk away from their own obligations the way I just had. My family still sat in various states of shock and denial at their prominent table near the front. My mother's face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or rage with her. It was always hard to tell where one emotion ended and another began. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping even from this distance. My sister Emily watched me leave with something that might have been envy in her eyes, quickly masked when she noticed me looking. And Victoria, the cousin who had orchestrated this entire humiliation, sat frozen with her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't quite process that her carefully laid plans had backfired so spectacularly. I felt a pang not of regret, but of something more complex. Sadness, perhaps, for what could have been if they had been different people, if they had been capable of loving me without conditions, without judgment, without the constant need to diminish me to elevate themselves. But the sadness was distant, manageable, the kind of grief you feel for a dream you finally accepted will never come true. The Rolls-Royce waited where Alex had left it, gleaming under the entrance lights like a chariot ready to carry me into whatever came next. The valet who had parked it stood at attention, keys in hand, his eyes wide with curiosity but his professionalism intact. Alex tipped him generously, and the young man's face broke into a genuine smile, the first unguarded expression I'd seen all evening. As Alex opened the passenger door for me, I caught sight of my reflection in the car's polished surface. I paused, transfixed by what I saw. I looked different somehow, even though nothing physical had changed. My champagne dress was the same, the silk still pristine despite everything that had happened. My hair remained pinned in the elegant updo I had spent an hour perfecting, though a few strategic tendrils had escaped to frame my face. My makeup was still flawless, the smoky eye and nude lip exactly as the makeup artist had designed them, but my eyes were different. There was no more fear in them, no more desperate need for approval, no more silent pleading for someone to see my worth. There was just me, Madison Hayes, seeing myself clearly for the first time in years. I looked strong. I looked free. I looked like someone who had finally figured out that the only person's opinion that truly mattered was her own. "Where to?" Alex asked as he slid into the driver's seat, his hands settling comfortably on the steering wheel. I settled into the plush leather seat, breathing in the scent of expensive leather and possibility. "Anywhere but here," I said, and then I laughed. Really laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. It started as a chuckle but grew into something bigger, something that shook my whole body with the force of its release. God, I should have done this years ago. "You did it when you were ready," Alex said, starting the engine. The car purred to life, powerful and smooth, the sound of 8 cylinders working in perfect harmony. That's what matters. Some people never do it at all. They spend their whole lives in that ballroom, accepting whatever treatment they're given because they're too afraid of the alternative. His words settled over me like a blessing. He was right. I could have spent the rest of my life showing up to family functions, enduring their cruelty, accepting their scraps of conditional affection, hoping that somehow, someday, they would finally decide I was worthy of their love. Some part of me had believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I just achieved enough, if I just became small enough and quiet enough and convenient enough, they would finally see me. But that was a child's fantasy, and I wasn't a child anymore. As we pulled away from Gatsby Mansion, I watched it recede in the side mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely behind the curve of the tree-lined road. With it went the last chains of a past I no longer needed to carry. The weight that had pressed down on my shoulders for 31 years lifted, and I took my first full breath in what felt like forever. The night stretched ahead of us, full of possibilities I couldn't yet name. The road unwound before us like a ribbon of dark silk, illuminated by the Rolls-Royce's headlights cutting through the darkness. Stars were beginning to appear in the sky above, pinpricks of light in the vast expanse of night. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was excited by it. Because whatever came next, it would be mine, chosen freely rather than accepted out of obligation or fear. Thank you, I said to Alex, though the words felt inadequate for what he had done, for the gift of witnessing my transformation and supporting it without trying to control it. For everything. For showing up tonight, for playing along with whatever this was supposed to be, for not trying to talk me out of walking away. Thank me by building the life you deserve, he replied, his eyes on the road but his attention clearly on me. That's all the gratitude I need. Live well, Madison. Live freely. That's the best revenge and the best redemption all rolled into one. I settled deeper into the leather seat, watching the lights of the city appear ahead of us. San Francisco glittered in the distance, a constellation of opportunities and new beginnings sprawling across the hills like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in that urban sprawl was the life I had been too afraid to claim, the version of myself I had been too timid to become. The career I had set aside to pursue the respectable path my parents had demanded, the friendships I had neglected because they didn't fit my family's narrow definition of suitable companions. The adventures I had postponed indefinitely because I was too busy trying to earn approval from people determined to withhold it. Not anymore. The girl who walked into Gatsby Mansion that evening, the one who had been prepared to endure another night of humiliation in exchange for scraps of family acceptance, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had seen rock bottom and discovered it was actually solid ground to build on. A woman who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who refuse to love you properly. Madison Hayes, single failure. That's what they had wanted to call me, to define me, to trap me in the amber of their judgment forever. But they were wrong, so fundamentally wrong that their error was almost laughable. I wasn't a failure. I was a phoenix, and tonight I had burned away everything that wasn't essential, wasn't true, wasn't mine. What remained was pure, distilled, uncompromisingly real. As the city lights grew brighter and the mansion faded further into memory, I smiled. Not the practiced, placating smile I had perfected over years of family dinners and society functions, but a real smile, wide and unguarded and entirely for myself. I smiled not because I had won some petty victory over people who had hurt me, but because I had finally, definitively, won myself back. And that, I was learning, was the only victory that had ever mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, unmapped, full of potential pitfalls and unexpected turns. But it was mine to travel, mine to navigate, mine to transform into whatever journey I chose to make of it, and for the first time in 31 years, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a world where I owed nothing to anyone except myself. I would build a life based on my values, my dreams, my definition of success. I would surround myself with people who celebrated me rather than tolerated me, who lifted me up rather than cut me down. I would take risks and make mistakes, and learn from them without someone cataloging my failures for future use as ammunition. Tonight, though, I simply drove through the darkness toward the light, free at last, and finally, beautifully, irreversibly mine.